The Pacific air off the coast of Singapore smelled of burnt sulfur, heavy diesel engine oil, and raw salt water. For 3 long, relentless years, Julian Vance's entire existence had been compressed into the metallic frame of Platform 42, an industrial oil rig floating over deep ocean depths. As a chief marine structural engineer, Julian's days were defined by load-bearing calculations, underwater stress tests, and the constant, rhythmic vibration of heavy machinery beneath his boots. He worked 18-hour shifts in blistering heat and tropical downpours, saving every single bonus, overtime stipend, and basic salary check. He had one singular purpose: Whispering Pines. Whispering Pines was a historic, 2-story beach house resting on the dramatic ocean cliffs of St. Andrews. Built from hand-milled cedar, heavy stone, and panoramic glass panels, it was the only sanctuary Julian had ever known. His late grandmother, Evelyn Vance, had willed the property solely to him before she passed away. Evelyn knew the value of solid ground, and she also knew the destructive financial habits of her own son, Julian's father, Richard Vance. In Julian's cramped quarters on the rig, a framed photograph of Whispering Pines hung above his bunk, reminding him why he was floating in international waters. The house needed serious structural reinforcement, and Julian planned to use his specialized engineering skills and saved capital to restore it completely. When his 3-year contract finally expired, Julian packed his sea bag, boarded a commercial flight from Singapore to Los Angeles, and rented a rugged SUV. As he drove down Highway 101 towards St. Andrews, the humid rig air was replaced by the sharp, familiar scent of California coastal pines. He rounded the final bend, eager to insert his key into the front door of his home. The moment the SUV turned into the winding, cobblestone driveway of Whispering Pines, Julian's excitement withered into an icy chill. Parked directly in front of the house was a matte gray Lamborghini and a massive commercial moving truck. The heavy carved mahogany double doors were swung wide open. 2 men in neon yellow vests were carrying an Italian leather sofa up the front steps, while another carried a massive crystal chandelier box into the foyer. Julian slammed his SUV into park and jumped out, demanding to know who authorized them to be on his property. Before Julian could take another step, a tall man in his late 40s stepped out onto the second-floor balcony. He wore a crisp linen suit, held a glass of scotch, and looked down with lazy condescension. The man introduced himself as Marcus Sterling, claiming he had bought the estate outright 3 days ago for $3 million cash, with the deed signed, notarized, and recorded. Julian felt the ground beneath him tilt. He had been on a flight over the Pacific 3 days ago. Sterling handed him a laminated copy of the closing document. Julian flipped to the final signature page. Stamped in dark blue ink by an official public notary was his full name: Julian Marcus Vance. The signature was an unnerving, perfect replica of his own. Beneath it were 2 signatures listed as authorized power of attorney representatives, Richard Vance and Eleanor Vance. His own parents had sold his home while he was mid-air over the ocean. Sterling stood beside his car with a smug grin, insisting everything was legal and telling Julian to take his civil disputes elsewhere. Julian didn't argue further. He needed hard facts and legal leverage. He drove to a scenic overlook, took out his phone, and called Sarah Jenkins, a high-profile forensic real estate attorney in downtown Los Angeles. Sarah reviewed the details and noted that the notary who stamped the document, Arthur Pendleton, was already under quiet state investigation for fraud. She urged Julian to bring every document to her office immediately before the escrow funds settled completely. Before heading to Los Angeles, Julian made a pit stop at the Riviera Country Club, where he knew his parents spent every Thursday afternoon. He walked straight onto the formal outdoor dining terrace, confronting Richard and Eleanor at their table. His mother gasped and paled, while his father tried to brush it off as family business. Julian called them out for forging his signature and committing federal real estate fraud. Eleanor frantically claimed they faced total financial ruin due to collapsed investments and that Julian owed them, while Richard admitted the $3 million had already been wired into an offshore trust account in the island of Nevis. Richard smugly asserted that reversing it would mean sending his own parents to prison. Julian gave them an ultimatum: 3 days to reverse the wire, return the money to Sterling, and restore the title, or face the consequences. 2 hours later, Julian met Sarah in her downtown Los Angeles office. She pointed out that while flight records proved the forgery, his parents had already filed a court motion claiming a verbal power of attorney agreement over WhatsApp, framing it as an internal family dispute to delay police action for years in civil court. Sarah explained that their only quick way out was to find a fatal flaw in the transaction itself, something so illegal that the escrow company would be forced to pull the money back to avoid a state shutdown. Julian spent the next 24 hours in the basement archives of the St. Andrews Municipal Land Registry office, combing through yellowed paper and historical land charters. At 3:15 a.m., he found a 1984 municipal land addendum. Clause Section 14b stated that any property on the high-risk coastal erosion zone could not undergo title transfer without a mandatory structural integrity and geological clearance signed exclusively by a state-certified chief marine structural engineer assigned to the local district. Julian was the only active certified marine engineer in that district. Without his official clearance seal, the entire escrow transfer was an illegal, invalid transaction. Julian snapped photos and called Sarah to arrange a showdown with all parties involved. At 7:15 a.m. the next morning, Julian met Sarah at a diner. Sarah revealed that international banking regulations required a 72-hour anti-money laundering hold on wires to offshore tax havens like Nevis. The wire hold on his father's transfer was set to expire at precisely 9 a.m. Furthermore, bank records proved Arthur Pendleton had received a $50,000 kickback check from Richard's shell company. At 7:45 a.m., Eleanor called Julian's phone in a panic, begging him not to block the transaction and crying about their impending ruin. Richard cut in with threats of endless litigation, but Julian remained ice cold, telling them to meet him in the boardroom on the 9th floor of First Pacific Escrow. At 8 a.m. sharp, the confrontation began in the escrow firm's boardroom. Present were escrow CEO Arthur Vance, corporate attorneys, buyer Marcus Sterling, Richard and Eleanor Vance, and the sweating notary, Arthur Pendleton. When Richard tried to frame the issue as a simple family misunderstanding, Sarah laid out the evidence: flight manifests proving forgery, proof of Pendleton's $50,000 kickback, and the binding Section 14b municipal charter requiring Julian's missing engineering clearance. The escrow company's legal counsel confirmed that the municipal covenant was binding and that the transaction was legally invalid, exposing the company to $9 million in treble damages. Hearing this, Marcus Sterling immediately canceled his wire hold and demanded his $3 million back, threatening lawsuits. Julian looked at his father and informed him that in 5 minutes, the digital paper trail of the Nevis wire and the kickback would be in the hands of the FBI. Panicked tears filled the room as Eleanor wept and Sterling ordered an immediate wire reversal. Arthur Vance ordered all Vance trust accounts frozen and reported to regulatory boards, while Pendleton crumpled in defeat. Richard sat frozen, completely broken as his fake luxury facade dissolved. Sarah confirmed that the deed cancellation was officially filed, restoring Whispering Pines back to Julian. By late afternoon, the moving trucks, luxury cars, and movers were gone from Whispering Pines. The legal aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. Richard and Eleanor avoided immediate federal prison by agreeing to a court-ordered settlement that forced them to liquidate all remaining assets, vehicles, and country club shares to pay off debts and fines. They were relocated to a modest apartment far from elite social circles, their standing destroyed. Pendleton lost his notary license and faced criminal indictment, while First Pacific Escrow paid heavy fines. Julian threw himself into restoring Whispering Pines. Over the next month, he traded his suit for work boots and hard hats, leading a team of contractors to reinforce the cliffside foundation with steel-reinforced concrete piers, rebuild the seawall, and install new panoramic glass panels. On a quiet Sunday evening, as the construction crew departed, Julian stood alone on the newly reinforced balcony of Whispering Pines. He held a hot cup of coffee and watched the sunset paint the sky over the Pacific. Below him, the seawall held firm against the crashing waves. Whispering Pines was secure, the tides of vengeance had receded, and he was finally truly home.